Harrington wouldn't give him a clear answer about his funding request, telling him, unfortunately, you keep finding more slaves, he said, and that every new person is a source of guilt and shame for Harvard. A spokesperson for the university said any assertion that Patricia Harrington disparaged the work of the Legacy of Slavery Initiative, including the Senate research, is false. Even though Salini was eventually given a budget for 2025, albeit a fraction of what he asked for, the university would soon halt his work entirely. So therefore, there's the smoking gun. There it is. And the fact is that they realized how much shit they were involved in, and they were like, oh, wait. We knew it was bad. We knew it was bad, but we didn't know that it was this bad. And now we have to stop. We have to stop finding victims of ours. This is basically what it is. We have to stop finding victims of ours because now we have to compensate the descendants of all these victims, and we can't do it. I got a bone to pick with these Ivy League schools, with these colleges and universities that have been around for 150, 175, 200 years. And namely, that bone to pick with them is that they engaged in chattel slavery of our ancestors. It is no surprise that in this country, that these institutions that have lasted for decades upon decades and, upwards of, a couple centuries, that they have deep ties and involvement with one of the biggest stains on the history of these United States. But it gets even worse as they seemingly try to rectify the wrongs, but once they're faced with the magnitude of how bad they are, they cower and they try to run away. So let's get into this. This is actually an article that I saw out of The Guardian, and let's get into this. This is going to be uncomfortable, but we got to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. All right, look, Harvard, step to the front, please. Let's go. So it says Harvard hired a researcher to uncover its ties to slavery. He says the results cost him his job. Quote, we found too many slaves. The blurb says when the extent of the university's involvement with slavery was unearthed, a scholar tracking descendants of enslaved workers was suddenly fired. Yes, fired. So we're going to move to this one. U.S. universities and the legacy of slavery. It says, though it contradicts a common perception of colonial New England, enslaved people were brought to work in northern cities in the north as well. In her book, New England Bound, the historian Wendy Warren records the remarks of one European traveler who noted in 1687 that there was not a house in Boston, however small may be its means, that has not one or two enslaved people. Just to stop there. Slaves were considered property. They weren't considered people, they were considered property. That being said, it sounds like in the 17th century that slaves were as abundant as having multiple televisions in your home. Like you could throw a rock and be like, and at a person and be like, okay, how many TVs you got in your house? And you're pretty much going to say they have at least two, one in the bedroom and one in the living room, right? Some people have multiple TVs in their homes, and that's not considered unusual. So from this account basically means that even the houses with little means, meaning the people who were at the lowest rungs of the income ladder at the time, even had slaves. And we're talking about a northern state. Meanwhile, one of the largest slaveholding states back then was Rhode Island. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. A lot of slaves came through Rhode Island. So it just shows how big of an institution chattel slavery was here in these United States. Let's continue on. As the country's oldest and wealthiest university, Harvard's history is inextricable from the history of the transatlantic slavery. The enslaved labored in campus buildings. University presidents and professors owned people forced into bondage, and the school's wealth grew through a circle of donors intimately connected to the plantation system in the Caribbean, the American South, and the trafficking of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. So, the school's wealth grew through donors connected to chattel slavery. Meaning, how did those donors get rich? So that was blood money that was given. The blood of slaves, the descendants of freedmen like myself. You mean to tell me one of, if not the most prestigious private institution in this country got its wealth off of my ancestors, our ancestors, those of us who are Black American freedmen? That's fucked up. It is. Let's continue on. Says Harvard began informally to research its relationship into slavery as early as 2007, when a history professor, Sven Beckert, started leading undergraduate research seminars such as the one Chen took. In 2016, then Harvard president Drew Faust acknowledged the university was directly complicit in slavery. And in 2022, the university released an official report, Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery, which detailed its history over more than 100 pages. So these are some chattel slaves that were enslaved. The caption says photographs of enslaved people in the US, possibly the oldest known in the country, were discovered in the basement of a Harvard University museum in 1977. That's from the Bettman Archive. These are ancestors. Harvard is not the only academic institution with this burden. Currently, more than 100 universities across the world are investigating their ties to slavery, the vast majority of which are in the US. A small subset of the universities researching their ties to slavery, approximately 5, have committed to conducting genealogical research and identifying living descendants. Religious denominations such as the Episcopal Church and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in more than a dozen cities and 4 states have also began researching their legacies of slavery. You heard that right. The churches that actually have involvement with slavery. It wasn't just, oh, well, they switched out the Bible so that they can have a slave Bible so they won't learn about liberation. Oh, the churches even engaged in chattel slavery. Churches. Are you mad yet? Are you mad yet? Because this is why, partially why, one of the primary religions of Black Americans today is Christianity. Why do you think that is? Uh-huh. Mm. There you go. Let's continue. The California State Reparations Task Force published a 1,000-page report 2 years ago, and the state legislators have been developing and passing reparations-related initiatives. Says the Guardian, founded in 1821 in Manchester, England, began its own process in 2020 when its sole owner, the Scott Trust, commissioned independent academic researchers to uncover its links to transatlantic slavery. It revealed that the newspaper's founder, John Edward Tyler, and 9 out of 11 of his financial backers had direct ties, mainly through Manchester's cotton industry. In 2023, Scott Trust apologized for his role in transatlantic slavery and committed to a 10-year restorative justice program with millions earmarked for descendant communities. That year, The Guardian also launched an ongoing series called Cotton Capital, which explores the legacy of slavery globally. So even the website of the company on which we're reading this from had involvements in chattel slavery. Even media outlets. Makes me wonder about the New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago sometimes. You know, Orlando Sentinel, Miami Herald, Tampa Bay Times. Makes me wonder. Makes me wonder if they had any also involvements in chattel slavery too. I'm just asking. It says in 2022, Harvard report included a list of recommendations by the Presidential Committee. Develop educational partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities, create a public memorial, and perhaps most conscientiously, identify living descendants of people enslaved by university staff, leaders, and faculty. The announcement was accompanied by a $100 million endowment for implementation. So, it says a source of guilt and shame for how Harvard. So it talks about how it says, when I visited Cellini in the archives of the Harvard Business School in the mid-February, he was bent over a 19th century ledger book, trained on a set of records with a magnifying glass. He's a trained attorney and tech entrepreneur. Through jovial and quick to joke, he becomes stoic when speaking about his research. He said an independent project in 2015 at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., to locate the descendants of 272 enslaved people by Jesuit leaders in the mid-1800s to raise money for the university. Locate the descendants of 272 enslaved people sold by Jesuit leaders in the mid-1800s. So even the Jesuits also were involved in chattel slavery. Whoo, boy, this is deep. This is deep. It says Cellini said he was driven by a sense of moral outrage upon learning about the sale, as well as the curiosity to see what he could find. Along with 10 other researchers, they would eventually locate more than 10,000 direct descendants. Cellini's effort, called the Georgetown Memory Project, remains independent, although the university has given preferential consideration during the admissions process to descendants and create a reconciliation fund for their benefit. So we all know that they have, this, they have found a lot of them. But here's the point that I really want to hit home on. Because I'm going to say this, and I mean this with the most sincerity. Harvard ain't shit. And we're going to find out why. Let's take a look at this. When he started the research, Harvard had already identified the names of 70 people that had been enslaved with ties to the university. Over the course of the past 3 years, working alongside American ancestors, the country's preeminent genealogical institute, Cellini and his researchers have identified more than 900 people that have been enslaved by university affiliates, faculty, staff, and people in leadership positions, and nearly 500 of their direct living descendants. It wasn't long after that work began to pick up steam that Cellini started running into trouble. In March of 2023, he said that he was asked to meet with the project's executive director, Roshana Moore Evans, and the Harvard staff member overseeing the initiative, the public health professor and vice provost for special projects, Sarah Blake. These informal meetings were held in a boardroom in the Student Center, a tall glass building overlooking the gates of Harvard Yard. It was there and by during extended phone calls that Cellini claims he was told repeatedly by Blake not to find too many descendants. Quote, at one point, the fear was expressed that if we found too many descendants, it would bankrupt the university. That sounds like a Harvard problem. That ain't my problem. Y'all shouldn't haven't engaged in chattel slavery. Y'all should have saw the consequences down the line and not engaged. And yet you did, though. All these billions of dollars of endowments, and you mean to tell me that you guys have had so many slaves that it would bankrupt Harvard. Bankrupt them. And now you guys are like, whoa, stop. Stop finding too many victims. Let's continue on. Cellini told Blake that it was ludicrous, he said. What was he supposed to falsify the evidence, to destroy it, to ignore it? I asked for guidance, and the answer was that she didn't know, he said. But we shouldn't report too many descendants. Blake denies this. The university never issued a directive to him to limit the number of direct descendants that could be identified through the work, she told The Guardian. Moore Evans declined to comment on the meetings, of course. In the process of trying to get additional funding for the project, arguing that the amount of work had increased tenfold because of all the additional names that were being uncovered. Cellini met with the finance director for the president's office, Patricia Harrington, this past fall. Harrington wouldn't give him a clear answer about his funding request, telling him, unfortunately, you keep finding more slaves, he said, and that every new person is a source of guilt and shame for Harvard. A spokesperson for the university said any assertion that Patricia Harrington disparaged the work of the Legacy of Slavery Initiative, including descendant research, is false. Even though Cellini was eventually given a budget for 2025, albeit a fraction of what he asked for, the university would soon halt his work entirely. So therefore, there's the smoking gun. There it is. And the fact is that they realized how much shit they were involved in, and they were like, oh, wait. We knew it was bad. We knew it was bad, but we didn't know that it was this bad. And now we have to stop. We have to stop finding victims of ours. This is basically what it is. We have to stop finding victims of ours because now we have to compensate the descendants of all these victims, and we can't do it. But that's the sin of your past presidents and people who are in the leadership of Harvard. They sentenced Harvard to bankruptcy because of clinging to an institution, a disgusting institution And you didn't have the foresight, the forethought to think maybe this institution would go away. Maybe the descendants of these people would come back with their hands out and go, hey, you guys did this to us. We need that debt owed. And now you're sitting there in the red, morally and literally in the red, because you decided to allow chattel slavery to be done in your institution. And now, because you're doing the right thing, you discover how much damage you did. And now you want to stop doing the right thing. You want to halt it. You want to say, we can't keep doing the right thing because it's going to cost us. You should have thought about that 200 years ago. You should have thought about it, but you didn't. The United States government should have thought about it. The states should have thought about it. Aetna should have thought about it. Wells Fargo should have thought about it, but you didn't think about it because you were so fucking greedy that what you did was you allowed chattel slavery to take place. And now, because you put the can down the road over and over and over, and now guess what? Guess what happens when you keep kicking the can down the road? It ticks up every single year. And guess what? Now you're in the trillions, if not quadrillions, owed to descendants of chattel slavery. Congratulations. You played yourself. You played yourself. And here's the thing. Paying us back for what our descendants have went through, for what you've done to them, that's actually justice. But you don't even want to implement it. Even though it's the right thing to do, you don't want to do it now. You don't want to do it. And you guys want, and the people who are in the upper echelons of these institutions want to keep their millions that they're getting. The shareholders of these companies want to keep their dividend checks going, even though those dividend checks are really just stolen money that you guys have that should be going to freedmen. That is stolen surplus labor that you have taken. And every dime that you get and you spend on your yachts is stealing from the people whose blood, sweat, and tears built this nation. And any wonder why people around the world, including many of my descendants, curse this country? And now when you're faced with doing the right thing, you want to turn it around and go back the other direction. Because you realized, you know what? Maybe this wasn't a good idea. Even though it's the right thing to do. We found too many slaves. Oh, you realize your shit actually stinks, huh? You realize how bad it stinks. You're going to have to sit with that, Harvard, as well as all the other institutions, whether they be educational, financial, or government institutions. You're all going to have to sit with it. And you're going to have to, look, it's going to hurt, but you're going to have to pay up. And all the conservatives are like, oh, well, you shouldn't be getting into debt. You should have thought about that before you signed that contract. Let's apply that to these institutions and the federal government. They shouldn't have done it too. But now they're on the hook. Fortunately for the federal government, they can actually print their own money, so they actually can pay it. So where's that check? Oh, but you rather give money to Israel. You rather give money to Ukraine. You rather give money to big pharma. You'd rather give money to the fossil fuel corporations. You'd rather give money to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Harlan Crow and Robert Kraft. You rather give all this money to these people who are ruining our planet day in and day out. But to the people who have suffered some of the original sins of this country, besides the Native Americans, you guys are like, nah, we don't want to give it. How this country begins is how this country goes out. How this empire begins is how this empire ends. This goes into some people who discovered that they were descendants of slaves that were utilized by Harvard. Going back to our first president, says that the Longfellow House Cuba met and married a man named Tony, originally from Jamaica, who was also enslaved in the Vassals. They had 6 children, including Lloyd's ancestor Darby. During the American Revolutionary War, the Royalist vassals fled and the house was occupied by George Washington, who used it as his headquarters during the siege of Boston. According to one anecdote, Washington asked the 6-year-old Darby to work for him, who replied he wouldn't work without wages. A 6-year-old was like, you ain't have me work with you without paying me. This is the living quarters of the chattel slaves. Still around. And a lot of people don't really know about this. Since the initiative was announced, actually, let me start here. It says Lloyd's family only contact from the administration. She said it was an icy interaction between Brown and Nagin during a group call, and she has heard nothing since. Naively, I was expecting them to be very welcoming and excited to facilitate discussion. I was hoping they would be warmer, more open to reconcile the long history. The university says it has not begun the outreach process. Since the initiative was announced, the university has given out more than $4 million in grants to local organizations and build out partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities, such as the Bois Scholars Program. This is by far the hardest job I've ever had, Blake, who oversees the Harvard Legacy Slavery Initiative. We are very serious about this, and we are very sincere. So here it is: firings, resignations, and attempts to dilute and delay research. In late January, as he pulled his car into the parking lot of Harvard Business School, prepared to begin another day of research in the university archives, Cellini received a call from an HR person who said he and his team were fired, effective immediately. He was never given an explanation, and the university spokesperson told The Guardian, "We cannot comment on personnel matters." The genealogy research the university announced after Cellini's firing will be continued through an expanded partnership with American Ancestors, the genealogy nonprofit that has already been working closely with Cellini's team. Says the initiative received its first public blow last spring when 2 university professors on the committee to create a memorial stepped down. saying in a letter obtained by the student newspaper that the university had attempted to dilute and delay the efforts to reach out to descendants. The committee was formed in 2023 based on one of the recommendations of the Harvard and Legacy Slavery Report to honor enslaved people through memorialization. In a statement made to the student newspaper, a spokesperson for the university said it takes seriously the co-chair's concerns about the importance of community involvement and of taking steps that will enable Harvard to deeply engage with descendant communities. A couple weeks later, the executive director of the initiative, Moore Evans, stepped down after reporting conflicts with the university administration to HR. She told The Guardian that she left for personal reasons. Says Salini suspects the reason he was fired is simple. We found too many slaves. The university was afraid that identified descendants would bankrupt the university, and so each name that his team identified was expensive. The work that he oversaw was just the tip of the iceberg. Estimated that the numbers of living descendants could be about 10,000 people. Salini had just come back from Antigua a couple days prior, where his team had visited the site of Royale Plantation, as well as 4 other plantations with ties to the university. They also found hundreds of additional names of enslaved people with ties to the university and public archives. Salini and his team met with Prime Minister and Governor of Antigua, who had expressed interest in working with the university to explore this connection. Salini said he detailed his meetings with the politicians to the university, but those requests were never answered, and he was fired shortly after. The Antiguan ambassador to the United States, Sir Ronald Sanders, wrote a letter to the university after Salini was fired, writing that the decision was made without consultation or notification. The country wants real engagement and meaningful action that befits the benefits that Harvard derived. We would not expect a cash payment from Harvard. However, a so well endowed a university with expertise in a number of areas could be helpful to our country. It says the cabinet discussed the possibility of Harvard funding ancestry research to identify descendants of Antiguans that were brought to colonial Massachusetts, and seeking the university's assistance in public health matters to address the high rates of chronic illness on the islands. The spokesperson for Harvard said that the letter had been sent in response, but refused to elaborate. The spokesperson for Antigua said, I have not seen a response and cannot confirm if a response had been received. So this is just part and parcel of these institutions. The blood that they spill reaches up to the stratosphere. And now they do not want to pay for the blood that they've spilled, for the harm that they've caused. And this is why this is an empire in decline. Because you do not want to reconcile the transgressions that you have caused. You will reap what you sow. Chickens will come home to roost. Fuck around and find out. And that's what's happening now. And so my hope is that once this system truly changes and is rebuilt, then the debt that is owed will be paid. And the descendants of freedmen can start to truly heal in a country that they built. Thank you so very much for watching my channel, and I deeply appreciate it from the top and bottom of my heart. If you wish to support the channel further, so I can keep bringing you content that is educational and informative, you can become a patron on patreon.com/Jaybefaunt. You can find that link in the pinned comment or in the description below. No matter what you give, you'll be supporting independent media and education that helps make the world better. Thank you so much, and you can watch more of my content here. Mwah! Forehead kisses, and have a beautiful day.